The howling wind threatened to shatter the window panes of Dia Jenkins's modest homestead as she watched her husband Douglas pack the last of his belongings into a single leather satchel. Outside, the Montana Territory of 1872 was disappearing under a thick blanket of snow that had been falling relentlessly for 2 days with no sign of stopping. "You cannot possibly mean to leave now," Dia said, her voice barely audible over the wind's mournful wail. She clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the chill in the cabin matching the cold dread spreading through her chest. "Douglas, look outside. No one could survive in that." Douglas Jenkins didn't meet her gaze as he fastened the buckles on his bag. "I told you, Dia, I'm not cut out for this life. Never was. The gold in California won't wait for spring." His voice held no warmth, no regret for abandoning his wife of 3 years to face the brutal winter alone. "We took vows," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks, in the unheated room. The fire had dwindled to embers hours ago, and Douglas hadn't bothered to stoke it. "For better or worse, Douglas, this is just a hard winter. It will pass. Like the last hard winter, and the one before that." He finally looked at her, his face a mask of contempt. 3 years I've wasted in this God-forsaken territory. 3 years of breaking my back for nothing but calluses and frozen fingers. I'm done, Dia." The cabin that had once felt like a promise now seemed to be closing in around her. When they'd married in St. Louis, Douglas had painted such beautiful pictures of their life in Montana. A prosperous ranch, children running through fields of wildflowers, prosperity born from honest work. None of it had materialized. The land was harsh, unforgiving, and Douglas's spirit had broken against it like waves on rocks. "What am I supposed to do?" She hated the pleading in her voice, but fear overrode pride. Their nearest neighbors were 10 miles away, and she had provisions that might last a month if she was careful. "I can't manage alone. Sell the place come spring. Go back to your father." Douglas pulled on his heavy coat and took his rifle from where it rested against the wall. "Or don't. That's not my concern anymore." "There's a blizzard," she said again, as if repeating the obvious might penetrate his resolve. "You'll die out there." A humorless laugh escaped him. "Better to die trying to reach something better than to waste away here?" He hefted his bag and moved toward the door. "Goodbye, Dia." She rushed forward, grabbing his arm. "Douglas, please, if you ever loved me—" He shrugged her off with enough force to send her stumbling backward. "That's just it. I don't think I ever did." The door opened, admitting a violent swirl of snow and bitter cold. Douglas stepped out without another word or backward glance. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound final as a coffin lid closing. Dia stood frozen in disbelief, staring at the rough-hewn door, waiting for it to open again, for Douglas to return, to say he'd made a terrible mistake. But minutes passed, and the only sound was the keening of the wind and the occasional crack of a tree branch giving way under the weight of ice and snow. Reality settled over her like a heavy mantle. He was gone. She was alone. Dia moved mechanically to the window, pressing her palm against the frigid glass as she peered into the swirling white. Douglas's figure was already disappearing into the blinding snow, hunched against the wind, heading west toward the nearest town of Whitefish. 60 miles through mountain passes in the worst blizzard she'd seen since coming to Montana. He wouldn't survive. A part of her, a dark, wounded part she didn't want to acknowledge, thought perhaps he shouldn't, not after this betrayal. Forcing herself away from the window, Dia assessed her situation. The fire was nearly out. The wood box beside the hearth held perhaps enough logs for 2 days if she was frugal. After that, she'd need to venture to the lean-to behind the cabin where they'd stacked the winter's supply. The pantry contained cornmeal, beans, salt pork, dried apples, and coffee. Precious little coffee. The cow in the barn would need milking, assuming she could reach the barn through the mounting drifts. And there were the chickens to consider. One step at a time, she told herself. First, build up the fire. She knelt before the hearth, adding kindling and the smallest logs, nursing the embers back to flames. The simple task centered her, pushing back the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She was alone? Yes, but she wasn't helpless. She'd grown up on a farm outside St. Louis. She knew about hard work and survival. Still, as the fire caught and began to warm her frozen fingers, Dia couldn't stop the tears that slipped down her cheeks. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of struggle and sacrifice ended with a slammed door and footprints already filling with snow. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of survival tasks and bone-deep cold. The blizzard raged for 4 more days, piling snow against the cabin until the windows were half covered. Dia ventured to the barn twice daily, following a rope she'd strung between the buildings to tend the animals. The trips left her exhausted and chilled to the marrow. On the 5th day, the snow finally stopped, but the temperature plummeted further. The world outside her window was transformed into a crystalline wasteland, beautiful and deadly. The silence after the storm's fury was eerie, absolute, except for the occasional sharp crack of a tree succumbing to the cold. A week after Douglas's departure, Dia awoke to find the cabin colder than usual. The fire had died overnight, and her breath frosted in the air above her bed. She'd been rationing the wood carefully, but miscalculated how quickly the intense cold would consume it. She would need to venture to the woodpile today, no matter how forbidding the drifts looked. Wrapping herself in every layer she owned, her warmest dress, 2 petticoats, wool stockings, Douglas's abandoned flannel shirt, her heaviest shawl, and finally her coat, Dia prepared to face the bitter cold. The door swung open reluctantly, hinges protesting against the pressure of drifted snow. Dia gasped as the full force of the frigid air hit her face, stealing her breath. The snow had drifted nearly to her waist in places, pristine and glittering beneath a deceptively cheerful sun. She began to wade through it, each step a battle. The lean-to stood only 30 yards behind the cabin, but it might as well have been miles. Her legs burned with effort, then began to numb. Her fingers, despite the knitted mittens she wore, quickly lost feeling. 10 yards from the cabin, Dia's foot caught on something beneath the snow, a fallen branch perhaps, and she pitched forward into the drift. The snow cushioned her fall, but immediately began to rob her of warmth. She struggled to rise, but her limbs felt increasingly heavy, unresponsive. "Get up," she commanded herself aloud, her voice sounding small in the vast white silence. "Get up, or you'll die here." She managed to push herself to her knees, then to her feet, but disorientation was setting in. The glare of sun on snow was blinding, and she'd lost her sense of direction. Which way was the cabin? Which way the lean-to? Panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. Dia forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. She turned in a full circle, searching for landmarks. There, the chimney of the cabin, barely visible above a snowdrift. She started toward it, but her legs were moving more slowly now, her thoughts becoming sluggish. How easy it would be to rest, just for a moment. The snow looked so soft, so welcoming. She was so tired. "No," she said aloud, recognizing the deadly lure of hypothermia. Her grandfather had told stories of men found frozen in the woods, peaceful expressions on their faces, as if they'd merely fallen asleep. She forced herself to keep moving, but each step required more concentration than the last. The cabin seemed no closer. Had she turned the wrong way? Dia blinked against tears that froze on her lashes. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, or her hands. The cold was creeping inward toward her core. "Please," she whispered, though to whom she wasn't sure. Her parents had been religious, but Dia's faith had wavered in the harsh realities of frontier life. "Please, help me." As if in answer, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats, muffled by snow but growing louder. A hallucination, perhaps, a dying mind's final comfort. But then a voice called out, a deep baritone cutting through the crystalline air. "Hello there, madam. You all right?" Dia tried to turn toward the voice, but her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled, and the white world tilted sideways as she collapsed into the snow. The last thing she registered before consciousness fled was the thunder of approaching hooves and a shadow falling across her face. Samuel Archer had been riding for 3 days through the aftermath of the blizzard, checking on the scattered homesteads that dotted this section of Montana territory. As the foreman of the Broken Pine Ranch, 15 miles to the south, he took it upon himself to ensure the welfare of the smaller operations in the area after severe weather. He'd almost missed the small cabin, half buried in drifts as it was, but the thin trail of smoke from its chimney had caught his eye. Then he'd spotted the figure struggling through the snow, moving erratically before collapsing. "Damn," he muttered, urging his stallion, Diablo, forward through the deep snow. The horse protested but complied, powerful muscles bunching as he forged a path toward the fallen form. Sam reached the woman, for he could see now it was a woman, and dismounted with practiced ease, despite the treacherous footing. He knelt beside her still form, alarmed by the blue tinge to her lips and the ice crystals forming on her eyelashes. "Madam," he touched her shoulder gently, then more urgently when she didn't respond. "Madam, can you hear me?" No response. Her pulse, when he found it at her throat, was faint and slow. Hypothermia advancing rapidly. She'd die if he didn't get her warm, and soon. Without hesitation, Sam gathered the woman into his arms. She was slight, nearly lost in the layers of clothing she wore, but even so, it was a struggle to remount with her cradled against his chest. Diablo snorted and shifted uneasily beneath the added weight. "Easy, boy," Sam murmured. "We need to get her inside. Quick now." He guided Diablo toward the cabin, noting with growing concern that no one had emerged despite the commotion. The woman lived alone? In this weather? It was almost unheard of for a woman to manage a homestead without a husband, father, or brother to help. The cabin door stood partly open, snow already drifting across the threshold. Sam nudged it wider with his boot and ducked inside, immediately assessing the situation. The fire was out, the interior nearly as cold as outside. A single bed stood against one wall, a table and 2 chairs against another. Everything was neat but Spartan, speaking of limited means. He laid the woman on the bed and worked quickly to remove her snow-crusted outer garments. Her skin was alarmingly cold to the touch, her breathing shallow. "Don't you die on me," he muttered as he rubbed her hands between his, trying to stimulate circulation. "Not after I just found you." First priority, fire. Sam moved to the hearth, relieved to find kindling and a few logs in the box nearby. Not enough to last long, but enough to start. His fingers, practiced at this task, even in the coldest conditions, quickly arranged the wood and struck a match from the tin on the mantel. As flames began to lick upward, he glanced around for more fuel. Nothing. The wood box was nearly empty. He'd have to venture out for more soon, but first, he needed to warm the woman. Sam returned to her side, concern deepening as he noted no improvement in her condition. Her skin remained ashen, her breathing labored. Body heat would be the quickest way to warm her. "Forgive the impropriety, madam," he said to her unconscious form as he shed his heavy coat and boots. "But I aim to keep you alive." He slid onto the narrow bed beside her, pulling the quilt over them both and drawing her cold body against his warmth. It was like embracing ice, but Sam held firm, tucking her head beneath his chin and rubbing slow circles on her back. "That's it," he encouraged as she instinctively pressed closer to his warmth. "Come back now." Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. The fire gained strength, gradually warming the small space. Sam continued to hold the woman, monitoring her breathing, occasionally chafing her hands and feet to help restore circulation. Finally, she stirred, a small moan escaping her lips. "Easy," Sam said softly as her eyelids fluttered. "You're safe now." Her eyes opened fully, striking blue eyes, he noted with an odd catch in his chest. Confusion clouded them, followed rapidly by alarm as she registered the unfamiliar man holding her. She tried to pull away, but weakness prevented any real escape. "Who?" Her voice emerged as a croak. She swallowed and tried again. "Who are you? Where's Douglas?" "Name's Samuel Archer. I'm the foreman at Broken Pine Ranch." Sam released her but remained close enough to share warmth. "Don't know any Douglas, madam. Found you collapsed in the snow. Nearly froze to death." Memory returned to her eyes, along with something like despair. "Douglas, my husband. He left during the blizzard." Sam frowned. What kind of man abandoned his wife in the middle of a Montana blizzard? Left for where? California gold. Her words were becoming clearer, though her voice remained weak. He said he was done with this life. The implications sank in, stoking a slow burn of anger in Sam's chest. This woman's husband had abandoned her to certain death, choosing gold fever over his marriage vows. Sam had seen it before. Men broken by the harshness of frontier life, fleeing west on promises of easy riches. Few found what they sought. Many died trying. "What's your name, madam?" he asked gently. "Dia Jenkins." She looked past him toward the door. "How bad is it out there?" "Bad enough. Worst blizzard I've seen in my 15 years in the territory." Sam watched her face carefully, noting the return of color to her cheeks. A good sign. "How long have you been alone?" 7 days, maybe 8. Her brow furrowed. The days blurred together. Sam whistled low. "You've done well to survive this long. Many wouldn't have." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'm not sure I would have survived much longer. I ran out of wood. I was trying to reach the lean-to when—" She trailed off, remembering her collapse. "Well, you're safe now." Sam sat up reluctantly, breaking the cocoon of warmth they'd created. "I need to get more wood before this fire dies." "Where's your lean-to?" "Behind the cabin, about 30 yards." Dia pushed herself to a sitting position, swaying slightly. "I should help." "You should rest," Sam countered firmly. "You nearly died, Mrs. Jenkins. Your body needs time to recover." She looked ready to argue, but then nodded, sinking back against the pillows. There's soup in the pantry, and coffee, though precious little of it. I'll tend to everything, Sam assured her, pulling on his coat and boots. You just focus on getting warm. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long blue shadows across the snow. Sam made his way to the lean-to, relieved to find a substantial stack of split wood inside. Someone, Douglas presumably, had at least prepared for winter before deserting his wife. He filled his arms with logs and returned to the cabin, making 3 more trips until a respectable pile stood beside the hearth. The fire was blazing now, filling the small space with blessed warmth. Dia had drifted to sleep, her face peaceful in repose. Sam took the opportunity to examine her more closely. She was young, perhaps 25, with chestnut hair that fell in waves around a heart-shaped face. Even pale from her ordeal, she was undeniably beautiful, with delicate features and full lips currently parted slightly in sleep. Sam forced himself to look away, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. She was a married woman, technically, abandoned or not, and he was here to help, nothing more. He busied himself exploring the pantry, assessing her supplies. The situation was concerning. Even with careful rationing, she had perhaps 2 weeks of food remaining. The nearest town, Whitefish, was 60 miles away, an impossible journey in these conditions. Sam found a pot and ingredients for a simple stew, moving quietly so as not to disturb Dia's rest. As he worked, he considered options. He couldn't leave her alone, that much was clear. But his own responsibilities at Broken Pine would soon require his attention. The ranch owner, Edward Montgomery, was expecting him back within the week. The stew was simmering when Dia stirred again, pulling herself to a sitting position with more strength than before. "Something smells wonderful," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just a simple stew. Should be ready soon?" Sam poured a cup of water from the bucket near the door and brought it to her. "How are you feeling?" "Alive, thanks to you." She accepted the cup with hands that trembled only slightly. "I don't know how to repay such a debt." "No debt between neighbors, Mrs. Jenkins. It's how we survive out here." Sam returned to the hearth to stir the stew. "Though I admit, I'm concerned about your situation. Winter's just begun, and your supplies are low." Dia's gaze dropped to the cup in her hands. "I know. Douglas, he was supposed to make another supply run before the heavy snows. But," she trailed off, the betrayal still too raw to articulate. Sam chose his next words carefully. "Mrs. Jenkins, I don't mean to pry, but did your husband give any indication he was planning to leave before the blizzard hit?" A humorless laugh escaped her. "No, though perhaps I should have seen it coming. He'd grown increasingly restless, increasingly bitter about our circumstances." She looked up, her blue eyes meeting his directly. "Please call me Dia. Mrs. Jenkins feels wrong now." Sam nodded, understanding more than she knew. He'd seen marriages crumble under the weight of frontier hardships. Men who fancied themselves pioneers often discovered they lacked the fortitude for the realities of territorial life. Dia, then. Her name felt right on his tongue. "And I'm Sam." He served the stew in bowls he found on a shelf, bringing one to Dia along with a spoon. She accepted it gratefully, the steam warming her face. "This is delicious," she said after the first spoonful. "You're a better cook than I am, I'm afraid." "Trail cooking. You learn quick, or you eat poorly?" Sam sat at the small table with his own bowl. I need to ask, is there anyone nearby? Family or friends who might take you in until spring? Dia shook her head. Our nearest neighbors are the Thompsons, 10 miles north, but they left for the winter. Went to stay with family in Helena. She hesitated. Douglas has a brother in Whitefish, but I've only met him once. I doubt he'd welcome the burden of his brother's abandoned wife. The word abandoned hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Sam felt a surge of protectiveness toward this woman he barely knew. What will you do? He asked gently. Survive the winter. Sell the homestead in spring, I suppose. Determination hardened her features. Go back east, perhaps. My father still lives in St. Louis. Sam nodded, though he couldn't help but note the way his chest tightened at the thought of her leaving Montana. Ridiculous, of course. He'd known her mere hours. That's months away, he said instead. And you can't stay here alone with limited supplies. What choice do I have? Dia set her empty bowl aside. I won't impose on strangers, and I have nowhere else to go until the pass is clear. Sam weighed his next words carefully. I have a proposition. The ranch where I work, Broken Pine, is 15 miles south. The owner's wife, Mrs. Montgomery, has been wanting help with household matters. They have a comfortable home, plenty of supplies, and would welcome another hand through winter. Hope flickered in Dia's eyes, quickly replaced by wariness. And your employer would agree to this arrangement? Taking in a strange woman? On your word alone? Edward Montgomery is a good man, and his wife Margaret is even kinder. They took me in years ago when I was little more than a drifter with a knack for horses. Sam leaned forward, earnest. I can't leave you here to starve or freeze, Dia. I won't. She studied him, seeming to weigh his sincerity against her own reservations. Finally, she nodded slowly. When could we leave? Not for a few days. You need to regain your strength, and we should wait for the snow to settle some. Sam glanced out the window at the darkening sky. I'll stay until you're well enough to travel. You'd do that for a stranger? The question held genuine bewilderment, as if kindness had become foreign to her. Like I said, it's how we survive out here. Sam collected their empty bowls. Besides, I'm not in the habit of leaving people to die. The barb at her husband's actions was unintentional, but Dia flinched nonetheless. Douglas wasn't always. She stopped herself, perhaps realizing there was no defense for what he'd done. Thank you, Sam. Truly. As darkness fell, Sam banked the fire and prepared to sleep on the floor near the hearth, using his saddle as a pillow and his coat as a blanket. Take the bed, Dia protested. You're the one who rode all day in the cold. And you're the one recovering from near freezing, Sam countered. I've slept on worse than this floor, believe me. She looked ready to argue further, but conceded with a grateful nod. Good night, then, and thank you again for my life. Good night, Dia, Sam replied softly, watching as she settled beneath the quilt. As the fire's glow cast dancing shadows across the small cabin, Sam stared at the rough-hewn ceiling and wondered at the twist of fate that had brought him here today. He'd almost taken a different route on his rounds, almost missed seeing the smoke from her chimney. If he had, Dia Jenkins would likely be dead by morning. The thought made him shudder. He hadn't felt this immediate connection to another person in, well, perhaps ever. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was the quiet strength he sensed beneath her vulnerability, the dignity with which she faced her abandonment. She deserved better than a husband who would leave her to die for the false promise of gold. She deserved someone who would stay through blizzards and hardships, someone who recognized her worth. Sam closed his eyes, forcing such thoughts away. She was still married, technically, and even if she weren't, she'd likely return east come spring. Getting attached would only lead to heartache. Still, as sleep claimed him, his last conscious thought was of blue eyes that reminded him of Montana's summer sky. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Sam woke at first light, his breath frosting in the chill air. The fire had died to embers overnight, and he quietly rebuilt it, adding logs until flames danced merrily in the hearth. Dia still slept, her breathing deep and regular, a vast improvement from yesterday. Color had returned to her cheeks, and the blue tinge had left her lips. She would recover fully, given time and proper care. Sam moved to the small window, clearing a patch in the frost to peer outside. The sun was rising in a cloudless sky, turning the snow-covered landscape into a glittering expanse that stretched to the distant mountains. Beautiful, but deadly, like so much in this territory. His gaze fell on the barn, partially visible behind a snowdrift. He'd neglected to check it yesterday, focused entirely on saving Dia. But if there were animals depending on her care, they would be suffering by now. Pulling on his coat and hat, Sam slipped quietly out the door. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath for a moment before he adjusted. He waded through drifts toward the small barn, noting the signs of Dia's previous passages, now mostly filled with fresh snow. The barn door was frozen shut. Sam had to put his shoulder against it, pushing with all his considerable strength before it gave way with a groan of protest. Inside, the relative warmth and familiar smells of hay and animals greeted him. A cow lowed mournfully from a stall, clearly uncomfortable from not being milked. Nearby, a dozen chickens huddled together for warmth, their water frozen solid. In another stall, a sturdy plow horse stomped restlessly. "Well now," Sam murmured, "let's get you all sorted." He found a bucket and approached the cow, who eyed him warily, but stood patiently as he began to milk her. His hands moved with practiced ease. He'd grown up on a small farm in Ohio before heading west at 16, and some skills never faded. When he finished, he broke the ice in all the water troughs and refilled them from a pump that thankfully hadn't frozen solid. He distributed hay to both larger animals and scattered feed for the chickens, who immediately began pecking with renewed vigor. Tasks completed, Sam collected the full milk bucket and returned to the cabin, his mind working through practical concerns. The animals complicated their situation. They couldn't be abandoned, but transporting them to Broken Pine through deep snow would be challenging. Perhaps one of the neighboring homesteaders could take them until spring, when Dia sold the place. He entered the cabin to find Dia awake and attempting to prepare breakfast, though she moved with the careful deliberation of someone still recovering her strength. "You should be resting," he chided gently, setting the milk bucket on the table. She turned a determined set to her jaw. "I've rested enough, and I won't be a burden while I have strength to work." Her eyes fell on the bucket. "You milked Buttercup?" "And fed the horse and chickens. All seem healthy enough, though I expect they've missed your care." Sam removed his coat and hat. "Sit down, Dia. You're still pale." To his surprise, she complied without argument, sinking into a chair at the table. "Thank you. I've been worried about the animals." I wasn't sure I'd make it back from my last trip to the barn. The simple admission of vulnerability touched something in Sam. How terrified she must have been. Alone and growing weaker by the day, with no hope of rescue. "Well, they're fine now, and so are you," he said, taking over the breakfast preparations. "We need to discuss what to do with them when we leave for Broken Pine." "Leave?" Dia looked momentarily confused, then understanding dawned. "Oh, yes. Your employer's ranch." "You still want to come, don't you?" Sam asked, concerned by her hesitation. "Yes, of course. It's just—" She gestured around the small cabin. "This place represents everything Douglas and I worked for. Leaving feels like admitting defeat." Sam cracked eggs into a pan, considering his response carefully. "Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is recognize when a situation can't be salvaged. It's not defeat, Dia. It's survival." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her hands folded on the table. "You're right, of course, and I am grateful for the opportunity." She looked up at him, a small smile touching her lips. "I'm a decent cook, you know, and I sew quite well. I won't be useless to your Mrs. Montgomery." "I never thought you would be." Sam served the eggs alongside slices of salt pork. "But first, we need to get you back to full strength, and we need to figure out what to do with your livestock." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth. Outside, the sun continued to rise in the clear sky, its light streaming through the small windows in brilliant shafts. "The Griersons," Dia said suddenly. "Their place is about 7 miles east of here. They're older, but sturdy folk. They might be willing to take the animals until spring." "Good thinking. If the weather holds, I could ride there tomorrow, make the arrangements." Sam refilled her coffee cup. They were using the precious beans sparingly. "We could leave for Broken Pine the day after, if you feel strong enough." Dia nodded, though Sam noted the apprehension in her eyes. She was trading the familiar, however precarious, for the unknown. It would take courage, especially after the betrayal she'd experienced. "Tell me about this ranch," she said. "Broken Pine, you called it?" Sam was happy to oblige, describing the sprawling operation that encompassed nearly 10,000 acres of prime Montana grassland. Edward Montgomery had come west 15 years earlier with nothing but ambition and a talent for recognizing good horseflesh. Now he ran one of the most successful ranches in the territory, with a herd of 500 cattle and a growing reputation for breeding exceptional horses. "And Mrs. Montgomery? What's she like?" Dia asked, clearly trying to envision her potential new employer. "Margaret's a fine woman, Eastern educated. She was a school teacher in Boston before she married Edward. She's made that ranch house into a real home, with curtains at the windows and books lining the shelves." Sam smiled at the memory. "She's always saying she needs help managing it all, especially with the crew of hungry cowboys to feed. And they live well, even in winter, better than most in these parts. Edward believes in preparing thoroughly for winter. The storerooms are always well stocked." Sam watched understanding dawn in her eyes, understanding of just how precarious her own situation had been. "They're good people, Dia. They'll welcome you." She nodded, seemingly reassured. "And how did you come to work for them? You mentioned they took you in." Sam hesitated. His past wasn't something he often discussed, but Dia's open expression invited confidence. "I drifted west from Ohio when I was 16. Worked cattle drives in Texas. Did some mining in Colorado. none of it amounting to much. He gazed into the fire, memories surfacing. By the time I reached Montana, I was 22 and pretty much broke. Took a job as a hand at Broken Pine, expecting to move on come spring. But Edward saw something in me, I guess. Kept giving me more responsibility. 5 years later, he made me foreman. You found a home, Dia said softly. I did. Sam met her gaze. And now I'm offering to help you find one too, at least until you decide what your future holds. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition perhaps of kindred spirits. Both had faced hardship. Both understood loss. But where Sam had found his place in the world, Dia was still adrift, unmade by her husband's betrayal. Thank you, she said simply. And in those 2 words, Sam heard acceptance of his offer and gratitude for more than just physical rescue. The day passed in quiet productivity. Dia's strength returned gradually, allowing her to help with small tasks, while Sam split more wood and tended the animals again. They shared simple meals and conversation, learning each other's stories bit by bit. Sam discovered that Dia was the daughter of a prosperous St. Louis merchant who had reluctantly blessed her marriage to Douglas Jenkins, a man with grand dreams but little practical experience. They'd come west with optimism that quickly eroded in the face of Montana's harsh realities. Douglas had grown increasingly resentful, his dreams of easy prosperity giving way to bitterness that he ultimately took out on his wife. I should have seen it coming, Dia admitted, as they sat by the fire that evening. The signs were there. He stopped talking about our future and started talking about what he might do if he weren't trapped here. That's not on you, Sam said firmly. A man makes his own choices. He chose to leave rather than honor his commitments. Dia studied him in the firelight. You're a rare sort, Samuel Archer. Most men I've known would defend another man's actions, right or wrong. Then you've known the wrong sort of men. The words came out more harshly than he'd intended. Sam softened his tone. I believe in judging a man by his actions, not his words. Your husband's actions speak for themselves. Dia nodded slowly, a weight seeming to lift from her shoulders. Yes, they do. The following day dawned as clear as the previous one, though if anything colder. Sam set out for the Griersons' homestead shortly after sunrise, promising to return by nightfall. Dia, looking much recovered, stood in the doorway as he mounted Diablo. Be careful, she called as he turned the horse eastward. The temperature is dropping. I can feel it. Sam nodded, touched by her concern. Keep the fire going. I'll be back before dark. The journey to the Griersons' place was arduous, but uneventful. The elderly couple was surprised to see him, but quick to agree to his proposal once they understood Dia's situation. Sam had barely cleared the last drift when the Griersons' place finally came into view, smoke curling steadily from their chimney. By the time he was warming himself by their fire, the plan was settled. Yes, they would take Dia's animals until spring. Yes, they would help her sell the homestead when the time came. That Jenkins boy never did strike me as having much backbone, old Mr. Grierson muttered, stroking his white beard. But to leave a wife alone in winter, that's beyond cowardice. That's murder by proxy. Sam couldn't disagree. He left as soon as he could, pushing Diablo hard on the way back. The snow was treacherous, and the cold bit deep. But the thought of that little cabin waiting in the growing darkness pulled him on. By the time he saw it, the sun was gone, and a soft glow spilled from the windows. a small island of warmth in the frozen world. Unexpected emotion tightened his chest at the sight of it. Relief, certainly, but something else too, something warm and complicated that he didn't care to look at too closely. He stabled Diablo, rubbed him down carefully, and checked the rest of the animals before trudging through the snow to the cabin door. Inside, the simple space had been transformed. The table was covered with the best cloth the cabin owned. The good dishes were laid out. Candles, precious, hard-won candles, burned softly in the center. The smell of fresh bread hung heavy and warm in the air. "Welcome back," Dia said almost shyly. "I thought we could celebrate our last night here with something special." Sam stood there for a heartbeat, too moved to speak. No one had gone to such trouble for him in... he couldn't even remember how long. "This is wonderful," he managed at last, shrugging off his snow-crusted coat and hat. "How did you manage bread?" "I've been saving a little flour." She smiled, half embarrassed. It seemed like the right occasion to use it. "Sit. You must be frozen." He did, still taking her in. She'd changed out of her plain, practical dress and into something finer. Deep green, the fabric a little worn but still lovely. It made her chestnut hair glow and brought out the blue in her eyes. She'd pinned her hair up simply, but there was a quiet elegance to it. She was beautiful. He'd noticed before that she was pretty, in a tired, faded way. But tonight, with color in her cheeks and a softness in her eyes that wasn't fear, the realization struck him like a blow. "The Griersonens agreed," he said, dragging his mind back to business. "They'll take the animals tomorrow and keep them until you're ready to sell in spring." Relief loosened the tension in her shoulders. "That's wonderful news. They're good people." "They are, and they're concerned for you." He accepted the bowl of stew she offered. Venison, he realized, from the small cache in the root cellar. "They asked me to tell you you're welcome any time, if you want to check on the animals." "I'd like that," she said softly. "Buttercup was a wedding gift from my father. I've grown quite attached to her." They ate in companionable silence for a while. The stew warmed him from the inside, and the bread, though simple, was excellent. "This is delicious," he said honestly. "You're an excellent cook, Dia." She smiled, pleased. "My mother taught me. She always said a woman should know how to make a comfortable home, no matter the circumstances." "She taught you well," he hesitated. "Mrs. Montgomery will be fortunate to have your help." The reminder of the coming change dimmed her expression. "Do you think..." Dia fiddled with her napkin. "Will I fit in there? At Broken Pine?" Sam understood the worry. After years of isolation with a husband who grew more resentful by the day, the idea of stepping into a well-run household with strangers would be daunting. "You'll more than fit in," he said firmly. "The Montgomerys are good judges of character. They'll see your worth right away." "And the Cowboys?" she asked quietly. "The ranch hands? I don't want to be a source of gossip or trouble." "Any man working for Edward Montgomery knows how to behave himself," Sam told her, "or he finds himself looking for work elsewhere." Without really thinking about it, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "But if you're worried," he added, "I give you my word. I'll make sure you're treated with nothing but respect." The touch seemed to steady her. She looked up, blue eyes luminous in the candlelight. "I believe you, Sam," she said softly, "and I'm grateful, more than I can say." For a long moment they stayed like that, hands joined, something unseen but powerful humming between them. Then, as if both suddenly remembered themselves, they pulled back at the same time. "I should check everything for tomorrow," Dia said, rising. "The weather looks like it's changing again. I don't trust Montana skies." "Neither do I," Sam agreed, helping her clear the dishes. They moved around each other in an easy rhythm, passing plates and bowls, stepping aside without colliding, working together as if they'd done it for years. It felt right in a way Sam hadn't felt in a very long time. That night, as he settled onto his pallet near the hearth, watching the fire burn low, he stared into the embers and made a silent promise. He would get Dia safely to Broken Pine. He would make sure she was welcomed and looked after. And then he would step back and give her room to heal and decide her own future without interference. It was the honorable thing. But when sleep finally claimed him, the last image in his mind was of a green dress, a shy smile, and blue eyes full of quiet courage. Morning brought change. The sky was low and heavy, clouds swollen with snow. The air had that metallic weight that warned of a storm. "We should leave as soon as we can," Sam said as they finished a quick breakfast. "I don't like the look of those clouds." Dia was already dressed in her warmest clothing, shawl wrapped tight, her hair pinned up to keep it out of the wind. She'd packed a few small, precious things she couldn't bear to leave behind. A tiny portrait of her parents, her mother's book of poetry, a silver hairbrush that was her one bit of luxury. "I'm ready," she said. "The Griersonens should be here within the hour, if I understood you correctly." "They will be." He checked the fire one last time, banked it safely, and watched as she moved through the little cabin, touching things as if in farewell. The rocking chair Douglas had carved in their first year, the quilt her mother had sewn for her hope chest, the simple dishes they'd brought from St. Louis. "It's strange," she murmured. "This place has seen so much hardship, so much disappointment, and yet I find myself reluctant to leave it." "Places hold memories," Sam said quietly. "Good and bad both. You don't have to decide everything about it today. You can come back in spring, see how you feel, and make your choice then." She nodded, straightening. "Yes, that's sensible." The jingle of harness and murmur of voices outside announced the Griersonens' arrival. Soon the yard was full of movement. Buttercup protesting unfamiliar hands, Samson the plow, Gelding following docilely on a lead rope, the chickens crated and ready for travel. With the animals loaded and the cabin locked, there was nothing left to delay them. Dia stood for a moment in front of the little house, snow beginning to fall in slow, heavy flakes. Then she turned to Sam, her gaze steady. "I'm ready," she said. He helped her mount Diablo, then swung up behind her. The stallion shifted but accepted the double weight without complaint. They said their goodbyes to the Griersonens, who promised once more to care for everything, as if it were their own. As they rode away, Dia twisted in the saddle for one last look at the homestead that had been her prison and her refuge. Then she faced forward, back pressed against Sam's chest, eyes on the road ahead. The snow thickened as they traveled south, the world narrowing to white swirls and shadowy shapes. They rode in silence, each wrapped in thoughts too tangled and heavy to voice. At midday they stopped briefly to rest Diablo and eat a little bread and dried meat. The wind picked up as they mounted again, driving the snow sideways. "How much farther?" Dia called, her voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around her face. "About 7 miles," Sam answered. "If we keep moving, We'll make it before the worst hits." He urged Diablo forward, trusting the stallion's feet and his own knowledge of the land more than his eyes. Landmarks faded and reappeared in the shifting white, but he pressed on. Dia leaned back into him as the wind knifed through their layers. Without thinking, he slid an arm more firmly around her waist, pulling her close against his chest. "Not much farther now," he said, though the wind nearly stole the words. At last they crested a low rise, and there, faint through the curtain of snow, were warm, yellow squares of light. Broken Pine Ranch. Dia sagged against him with relief. "We made it," she breathed. The last half hour felt longer than the entire day. The house loomed out of the storm, a solid 2-story log structure with a wide wraparound porch. Beyond it, Sam caught glimpses of the bunkhouse, barn, and outbuildings. The front door opened as they rode into the yard, spilling golden light onto the snow. A tall figure hurried down the steps. "Archer! Thank God!" Edward Montgomery called over the wind. "We were beginning to worry." Sam swung down first, then reached up quickly as he felt Dia sway. Her legs nearly folded after the long ride, and he steadied her with a firm hand at her elbow. "Mr. Montgomery," Sam said. "This is Mrs. Dia Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins, my employer, Edward Montgomery." Edward, his dark hair threaded with silver, removed his hat despite the driving snow, and bowed slightly. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said warmly, "welcome to Broken Pine. Please, come inside where it's warm. My wife is eager to meet you." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Montgomery," Dia managed, pale but composed. "I'm very grateful." "Any friend of Archer's is welcome here," Edward replied as he ushered them in. The interior of the house was just as Sam had described it, comfortable, well-kept, and touched with unexpected refinement. A great stone fireplace dominated the main room, throwing out generous heat. Woven rugs softened the polished floors. Bookshelves, paintings, and a carefully ticking clock added quiet dignity. A moment later, a woman appeared from the direction of the kitchen, drying her hands on an apron. Margaret Montgomery, handsome and warm-eyed, crossed the room with brisk compassion. "At last," she said. "We've been watching that storm all afternoon, hoping you'd get here ahead of it." She took Dia's cold hands between her own. "Mrs. Jenkins, welcome. I'm Margaret. You must be exhausted and frozen. We'll have you warm and settled in no time. Please, call me Dia," she said, visibly moved by the kindness. And yes, it was quite a journey. "Dia, then." Margaret flashed a grin. "Hot bath, warm clothes, and a proper meal. In that order. Archer, you look about as worn as your horse. Edward will see you to your room once you've checked on the animals." Sam hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Margaret would take care of Dia. No one did it better. "I'll see to Diablo first," he said. "Make sure he's settled." "Of course." Edward clapped him on the back. "We'll talk in the barn." As they stepped back into the storm, Sam glanced over his shoulder. Dia stood just inside, framed by the firelight, Margaret's arm already around her shoulders. Safe, warm, no longer alone. It was enough for now. The blizzard raged for 3 days. The bunkhouse overflowed, so most of the hands slept in the barn, caring for the stock and playing cards by lantern light when the work was done. In the main house, life folded in around the fire. Dia refused to be idle. On the second day, she was in the kitchen with Margaret, sleeves rolled up, turning limited winter supplies into hearty meals. By the third, she'd claimed a basket of mending and was neatly repairing shirts, socks, and even a torn saddle blanket, with the same steady precision she'd once used on her own threadbare things. Sam watched her whenever their paths crossed. She moved through the house as if she belonged there. Not loudly, not with any sense of entitlement, but with quiet competence. Margaret took to her immediately. The two women could often be found talking by the fire, Margaret teaching, Dia absorbing everything she could, recipes, household management, bits of practical medicine Margaret had picked up as the unofficial doctor for miles around. When the storm finally broke, the ranch lay under a thick, glittering blanket of white. The sky was a clear, impossible blue. Sam stood on the front porch, nursing a mug of coffee, watching the hands dig paths between buildings. "It's beautiful," Dia said softly behind him. She stepped out, drawing her shawl more tightly around herself, and leaned on the rail beside him. "I've never seen a sky that color," she murmured. "Not in St. Louis." "Montana skies," Sam said. "There's nothing like 'em." They watched in silence for a while, the sun glinting off the snow, men calling to each other, horses shaking themselves free of frost. "You seem to be settling in," Sam said at last. "Margaret can't praise you highly enough." Dia smiled, cheeks pink from the cold. "She's been incredibly kind. They both have." She glanced at him. "Will you go back to your cabin now that the storm has passed?" "Soon," he said. "There's fences to check, cattle to find, drifts to deal with. I'll be coming and going for a while yet." "I see." Her expression was calm, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Mr. Montgomery mentioned there's a small chapel on the property. I'd like to attend services when they're held." "Every Sunday, weather allowing," Sam said. "The preacher rides a circuit. Only comes through every month or two. But we hold readings in between. Nothing fancy, but it's honest." "Thank you." She looked out over the snow again, then back at him. "Not just for that, for everything. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "Live well," he said simply. "That's payment enough." Something passed between them in that moment. Something they both felt, and both stepped carefully around. Then Edward called from inside, and the day's work claimed him again. Winter eased into a chancy spring. Dia officially became Margaret's companion and assistant, accepting a small salary only after insisting she wouldn't live on charity. She flourished. There was laughter in the house now, a lightness Sam hadn't heard there in a long time. Dia brought order to the linen cupboards, warmth to the guest rooms, and an extra set of capable hands to everything from baking to helping Margaret tend minor injuries. Sam divided his time between his cabin and the far reaches of Broken Pines Range. Some days he wouldn't see the main house at all. Others, he'd ride in bone-tired and find a plate kept warm for him, a shirt mended and folded, and Dia's quiet voice asking how the day had gone. He tried not to read too much into how often she appeared on the porch when he rode in, whatever the hour. He tried not to think too hard about how his own eyes searched for her first, before anything else. Then one raw March day, a rider came from Whitefish with mail and news. Among the letters was one addressed to Dia. Margaret brought it to her, then went looking for Sam, worry in her eyes. "It's Dia," she said. "She's asking for you." He found her in the small sitting room, a letter crumpled in her trembling hands. Her face was pale, eyes wide with shock. "It's Douglas," she said. "He's dead." Sam sat beside her. "What happened?" "His brother writes that he never made it to California." Her voice was oddly calm. "They found his body in a pass near the Idaho border, She swallowed. He froze to death during the blizzard. The same storm he'd left her to face alone. A tangle of feelings surged through Sam. Anger, grim justice, sorrow for her, and shamefully, relief. Whatever else this meant, Dia was no longer bound to a man who had treated her so carelessly. "I'm sorry," he said, because it was still the only thing he could honestly say. "That's a hard blow." She stared at the paper. "Do you know what's strange? I'm not surprised. I think some part of me knew the moment he rode away. He was never meant for this country. It was going to swallow him sooner or later." Margaret slipped quietly from the room, leaving them alone. "His brother wants to know what I want done about the body." Dia let out a brittle laugh. "They've kept it, preserved in the cold. He always wanted to go to California. Now he never will." Sam took her hand before he could think better of it. "What do you want to do?" She looked at their joined hands, then up into his face. "I don't know," she whispered. "He was my husband. I should feel something. Grief, anger, something." "You feel what you feel," Sam said gently. "There's no right way to react to this." She was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll write back," she said at last. "Ask his brother to bury him there, in Whitefish. I don't think I can—" Her voice faltered. "I don't want to see him, not even once more." "That's not wrong," Sam told her quietly. "He made his choices. You get to make yours." They sat like that, her hand in his, until some of the shock faded from her eyes. "I'm a widow now," she said finally. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "You are," Sam agreed, "and that brings its own challenges. But it also means your future is yours to decide, no one else's." She met his gaze, and there was something new in her eyes, a quiet resolve. "Yes," she said, "my future is my own now." The months that followed were full of work and change. Dia moved through something like mourning, but not for Douglas himself, she confessed to Margaret. For the life she'd hoped for and never had, for the young woman she'd been when she'd left St. Louis full of dreams. She wore black as convention demanded, but refused to seclude herself or abandon her responsibilities. "Life goes on," she said simply, "and I've had months to learn to live without him. This only confirms what I already knew." Spring came for real at last. Snow retreated to the shadows of the hills. The valley turned green, then burst into color as wildflowers spread across the meadows. Calving season hit in earnest, keeping Sam and the hands running day and night. Whenever he staggered into the main house, exhausted and mud-spattered, Dia was there, often with a plate of food in hand, or a cup of coffee, or a clean shirt laid out on the back of a chair. Her presence calmed him in ways he didn't understand. By the time the circuit preacher arrived for his spring visit, everyone in the valley knew and respected her. In the little chapel, seated beside Margaret, she was greeted by name by nearly every rancher and homesteader. After the service, as people lingered over coffee and Margaret's cinnamon rolls, Reverend Thomas found his way to Sam. "That new widow," the preacher said without preamble. "Mrs. Jenkins, I understand you rescued her during the blizzard." "I was lucky enough to find her," Sam replied cautiously. "She speaks well of you," the Reverend said, eyes keen. "Very highly." Sam said nothing, and the preacher smiled faintly. "She's a fine woman," he continued, "still young enough to build a new life. I hear she hasn't decided yet whether to stay in Montana or go back east." "That's what she's told me," Sam admitted. "Sometimes people need a reason to stay, Mr. Archer, Reverend Thomas said mildly. Something stronger than simply liking the scenery. With that, he moved on, leaving Sam with a whole new storm whirling inside his chest. The chance to speak came days later. Sam had just returned from checking the northern pastures and was heading toward the house when he saw her on the porch, shelling peas into a large wooden bowl. The evening light gilded her hair and softened the angles of her face. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, pulling off his hat. She looked up and smiled, that quiet, honest smile that still hit him like a fist to the ribs. "Please," she said, "these peas won't shell themselves." He sat beside her and took a handful, letting the familiar rhythm of the work settle him. For a while, the only sounds were the soft crack of pea pods and the gentle plink of peas falling into the bowls. "Edward tells me you're planning to ride out to the homestead next week," he said finally. "See things for yourself before deciding what to do with it." Dia nodded. "The Griersonens have been looking after the animals, and I should see them. And, she hesitated. "I need to look that place in the eye one more time. Decide if there's anything there I still want to hold on to." "If you'd like company," Sam said, keeping his tone as casual as he could, "I'd be glad to ride with you." She glanced over, a soft smile curving her lips. "I'd like that very much. Thank you." Another silence fell, comfortable but charged. "Dea," he began, then stopped. She turned to him fully, hands stilling over the peas. "Yes, Sam?" she prompted gently. He drew in a breath. He'd faced stampeding cattle with steadier nerves than this. "I've been wondering," he said slowly. "Are you still planning to go back to St. Louis when summer comes?" Understanding lit her eyes. The real question sat between them, clear as day. "I've thought about it often," she said. "My father has written. He says he'd welcome me home. There would be comfort there, security." Sam nodded, trying to ignore the weight settling in his chest. "Makes sense," he managed. "But..." Dia set her bowl aside and turned fully to face him. "I'm not the same woman who left St. Louis 3 years ago. I've changed. I know better now what I want." He held his breath. "And what do you want, Dia?" he asked quietly. Her gaze didn't waver. "I want to stay," she said, "in Montana. I want to build a life that's mine. Not my father's, not my husband's. Mine." And color rose in her cheeks. "I want to see if there might be something between us. Something real. Something lasting." The world seemed to narrow to the space between them. "I've wanted to say something like that for months," Sam admitted hoarsely. "But you were married, then grieving. It didn't feel right to speak. And now," she whispered, "what are your feelings, Samuel Archer?" He reached for her hand, fingers rough against the smoothness of her skin. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night," he said, "when you were half frozen and still too stubborn to give up. Everything I've learned about you since has only pushed me deeper." Her eyes widened, then softened into a radiant smile. "Even though I was a burden?" she asked softly. "An unexpected responsibility?" "You've never been a burden," he said firmly. "You've been a gift I never expected, a piece I didn't know I was missing." She turned her hand and twined her fingers with his. "I think I began to love you when you held me that first night," she confessed, voice trembling. "When you wouldn't let me slip away, when you warmed me back to life. Every day since has only proved what my heart already knew." Time seemed to stretch thin. The sounds of the ranch faded to a distant hum. "May I kiss you, Dia?" Sam asked. Please, she breathed. He leaned toward her, and she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, a question, a blessing. When they parted, her eyes stayed closed for a moment, her lips curved in a soft, contented smile that humbled him. I should tell you, he said when he could speak again. I'm not a rich man. I've got my cabin, some savings, my work with horses. It's not much to offer a woman like you. Dia opened her eyes and regarded him with tender amusement. I've learned that wealth doesn't mean much without character, she said. Douglas had big dreams and no substance. She reached up to touch his cheek. You're steady. Your word is good. That's worth more than gold to me. He turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. Still, he murmured, I want to build something worthy of you. A real home, not just my bachelor cabin. We could build it together, Dia suggested, eyes bright. I have money now from the homestead, and I've learned a great deal about what not to do when managing a place. Her smile tilted. We might make a decent pair. We, he repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Their trip back to her old homestead a week later felt like visiting a ghost. The weather was mild, the trails mostly dry. They rode separately this time, Sam on Diablo, Dia on a gentle mare named Willow that Margaret insisted she think of as her own. The cabin looked smaller than either of them remembered when it came into view across the meadow, its roof weather-stained, one shutter hanging crooked. It looks sad, Dia said quietly, more than I remember. Inside the cabin was neat but dust-coated. The Griersonens had kept it locked and secure, but it still had the unmistakable air of being left behind. Dia walked slowly through the single room, opening drawers, touching furniture, examining what remained. There was very little that meant anything to her now. I thought it would be harder to let go, she said at last, but it feels like this belongs to someone else, a girl I hardly recognize. Maybe because you found someplace better, Sam said gently from the doorway. She looked at him, and her smile this time was steady. Yes, she said. I believe that's exactly it. They visited with the Griersonens, checked on the animals, and arranged for the sale. Mr. Griersonen knew of a family from Minnesota looking for an established place. Dia agreed to the terms, content to leave the details in his capable hands. By late afternoon, her few remaining possessions were tied behind Sam's saddle. They mounted up. Dia took one last look at the cabin. Goodbye, she said softly, not to the house, but to the life it represented. Ready to go home? Sam asked, reaching out his hand. She took it. Yes, she replied. Home. This time, the word meant him. Summer in Montana came in a rush, long, hot days and brief, star-crowded nights. For Broken Pine Ranch, it meant moving cattle to higher pastures, tending fields, patching fences, and preparing for fall roundup. For Sam and Dia, it meant planning a future and watching a dream take shape, plank by plank. With money from the sale of the homestead and Sam's savings, they chose a spot for their home, a gentle slope near a creek, 2 miles from the main ranch house. Close enough for Dia to continue helping Margaret, but far enough to belong entirely to them. Edward, delighted, insisted on helping. Lumber was cut from Broken Pine's own timber. Hands volunteered labor in their off hours. By midsummer, the frame of a neat 2-bedroom house stood against the sky, its skeleton promising warmth and shelter. It's really happening, Dia whispered one evening as they sat on a log, watching the sunset burn gold along the roof beams. Our home. Sam took her hand. He still could barely believe it. It is, he said. Though I'll admit I'm getting impatient. For the house to be finished? She teased. Or for what comes after? Both, he said honestly, grinning. Mostly the after. They'd agreed, reluctantly, to wait until the house was complete to marry. Out of respect for convention and out of mutual stubbornness, to begin their life together properly. Reverend Thomas had promised to return in September to perform the ceremony. 2 months, Sam told himself. He'd waited years to find her. He could wait 2 more months to call her his wife. Barely. The house rose quickly. Walls, roof, windows, then the stone hearth. Dia spent every spare moment sewing curtains, planning where the furniture would go, dreaming aloud about the garden she'd plant in spring. News came from St. Louis that made the coming wedding even more special. Dia's father wrote that he would come west to see his daughter wed to the man who had saved her life and restored her happiness, as he put it. The words made Sam stand a little taller. When David Jenkins arrived, a distinguished man with Dia's eyes and a quiet dignity, Sam braced for disapproval. Instead, he found himself listening to stories of Dia's childhood mischief and watching father and daughter laugh together in the Montgomery's parlor. There was grief there, too, for years spent far apart, but it was healing, not raw. "Take care of her," David said quietly. "The day before the wedding?" "With my life," Sam answered, and meant it. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the air touched with the first crispness of autumn. The little chapel on Broken Pine Land was filled to the rafters, ranch hands in their best shirts, neighboring families in their Sunday clothes, Margaret dabbing at her eyes before the ceremony even began. Sam stood at the front, clothes newly pressed, hair as tamed as it ever got, Edward at his side as best man. His hands had never felt so big or clumsy. Then the organ began to play. Dia appeared on her father's arm, and the world dropped away. She wore an ivory silk gown, Margaret's gift, simple and elegant. Wildflowers were woven into her hair. Her eyes shone with the same steady courage he'd seen that night in the blizzard, now lit from within by joy. David placed her hand in Sam's. "Take care of her," he said again, voice thick. "I will," Sam promised. "Always." The words of the ceremony were familiar, but every line landed deep. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, the little church erupted in cheers, echoing out across the hills. The celebration back at the main house lasted well into the evening. There was music, food, dancing under lantern-lit trees. Dia and Sam moved through it all in a haze of happiness, accepting congratulations and good-natured teasing. As the sun began to sink, Sam caught Dia's hand. "Mrs. Archer," he said, savoring the sound. "You ready to go home?" Her smile was radiant. "I've been ready since the day you knocked on my door in that storm." They slipped away as the first stars appeared, riding side by side toward the house they'd built together. That night, in the quiet of their bedroom, with the window open to the cool Montana air and the faint murmur of the creek outside, they lay tangled together, learning each other in a new way. "I keep thinking how close I came to missing you," Sam whispered, tracing the curve of her cheek. "If I'd taken a different route that day, if the storm had hit earlier. But you didn't," Dia murmured, pressing a kiss to his palm. "You found me. Against all odds, you found me. And I'm never losing you," he vowed, pulling her closer. "Not as long as I draw breath." "Nor I you," she whispered, her ear over his steady heartbeat. Not ever. Outside, the Montana night wrapped their little home in darkness and stars. Inside, two people who had once been lost to wandering to abandonment had found each other at last. 5 years later, the land around Broken Pine lay golden under the summer sun. On the grass in front of a sturdy 2-story house near the creek, a dark-haired boy of 4 chased a tumbling puppy in exuberant circles, his laughter carrying on the warm breeze. From her rocking chair on the porch, Dia Archer watched her son with a smile that still made Sam's heart stop, even after all this time. Thomas Samuel Archer had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and absolutely no fear of anything. The screen door creaked open behind her. Sam stepped out, cradling a sleeping infant against his chest. Elizabeth Margaret Archer, 3 months old, had Dia's features, and, when she was awake, Sam's intense stare. "She finally surrendered," Sam said softly, easing into the rocker beside his wife. "Fought sleep like it insulted her, but I won in the end." Dia brushed a wispy lock from the baby's forehead. "Stubborn, just like her father." "I prefer determined," he said dryly. "And I seem to recall a certain woman who refused to die in a blizzard. She comes by it honest." They sat in easy silence, watching Thomas tear around the yard, the puppy a blur of motion behind him. It was hard sometimes, Dia thought, to connect this sun-washed scene with the half-frozen girl in the cabin, or the drifting man who'd knocked on her door. Behind the house, the barn and chicken coop stood solid and well-kept. The vegetable garden was a riot of green. Young fruit trees in the small orchard promised more and more each year. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years," she murmured. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday you found me in that snow. Other days, it feels like another lifetime." "Best day of my life," Sam said simply, "even if I didn't know it yet." She reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing out of long habit. "Mine too." Hoofbeats sounded in the distance. Thomas skidded to a halt, shading his eyes as a rider approached. "It's Uncle Edward," he shouted, waving. Edward swung down from his horse with the ease of long practice, greeting them with his usual grin. Shortly after, Dia was pouring lemonade, Elizabeth was snoring softly in Edward's arms, and Thomas was peppering the older man with questions about Aunt Margaret, cookies, and whether he was big enough yet to ride alone. They talked of ranch business, news from town, and then Edward cleared his throat. "I came with a bit of news," he said. "Town council finally approved the school building. They're looking for a teacher to start this fall." Dia's hands stilled. "I may have mentioned," Edward went on casually, "that we have a lady out here with an excellent education and a natural way with children." "You mentioned me?" Dia said, startled. "I did," he replied. "Hope that wasn't overstepping. They seemed quite interested." Dia looked out over their homestead, her thoughts clearly racing. Thomas under the cottonwood, Elizabeth in Edward's arms, the home she'd built, the life she loved. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I haven't taught properly since before I married Douglas, and with Elizabeth so young." "School won't start till September," Edward said. "Only 3 days a week at first. Just something to think on." Long after he left, her mind was still turning. That evening, with Thomas asleep under the tree and Elizabeth drowsy at her breast, Sam rocked quietly beside her. "You want to do it," he said at last. "Not a question, just recognition." Dia let out a breath. "Is it selfish, with the children so small, with all the work here?" It's not selfish to use the gifts you were given, he said. You're a teacher. I've seen it. You light up when you're helping someone learn. We can work out the rest. We'll get help with the children on school days. I can be here more often when you're gone. She studied his face, the corner of her mouth curling. You've already thought all this through, she accused gently. Maybe, he said, after I heard Edward and Margaret talking about the school last month. But it had to be your choice. And you didn't say a word. Her eyes softened. You really think I should? I think, he said, that you'd be wonderful, and that it would make you happy. She looked out over everything they'd built from the ashes of their pasts. When she turned back, the decision was settled in her eyes. Then I'll write to the council, she said. See if they'll have me. He leaned over and kissed her, careful of the baby between them. That's my Dia, he murmured, brave enough to walk into a blizzard, brave enough to start something new. I learned that from you, she said softly. From the man who could have ridden past a thin trail of smoke, and didn't. The man who warmed a stranger back to life and gave her a future. The sun slid lower, turning the grasslands to molten gold. Sam looked at his son asleep under the tree he'd planted the day the boy was born. At his daughter, safe and soft in her mother's arms. At the house they'd built, the land they'd tamed, the love that had grown from a storm that should have killed them both. I was just thinking, he said quietly, when Dia caught him staring, that I'm the luckiest man in the Montana Territory. Maybe the whole country. She laughed softly, her eyes shining. Then we're well matched, she replied, because I'm certain I'm the luckiest woman. As the light faded and the first stars appeared, they rocked in easy silence, hands intertwined, children safe, home solid around them. Once there had been only cold and fear, loneliness. Now there was warmth that no winter could ever take away.